We're interviewing Anne-Marie Rosman, who is a solicitor at the London law firm Charles Russell and now works at Motion Touch on contractual elements involved in new product development. Anne-Marie, what are the different elements of law that need to be considered when embarking on a new product development?
There's quite a few areas. The first one that springs to mind is intellectual property. Has somebody actually got the idea already patented? And if you've got a brand new idea, how do you go about protecting your own interests? Because that's really important. And then you need to think about how you go about getting that protection. Secondly, you've got to think about your legal liability. Are you going to be liable as an individual? Are you going to create a company? Or are you going into business with somebody else? If you're an individual, you need to think about your assets being potentially available to anybody that might come after you. So you might decide you want to create a company because that company is a legal entity in its own right and would take responsibility. However, if you buy an off-the-shelf company, which is very common for new businesses, they don't have a proven track record, so it's likely that anybody entering into contracts with you would want you to give some sort of personal guarantee. If you're going into business with a partner, you need to regulate how you're going to do business with that partner, because you might be coming into it with far more assets than they do, and if that's the case, then you are going to be the one taking the burden if there's a problem. Lastly, you've got to think about your financial liability, your insurance needs, and the liability for the products themselves. Where you actually market a product yourself, you are responsible under a sort of whole gamut of laws in relation to consumer use. So you need to be really sure that you've got that covered. You also need to think about funding. How are you going to pay for it? Are you lucky enough to have a lot of savings? Are you going to be looking for investors? Are you going to a business angel? Are you looking for a bank loan? And whatever you're going to do, you need to look at what you're signing up to protect yourself. It's very, very important that you plan ahead. There's a very famous saying that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So you need to really think about that one and know where you're going.
But clearly it is very important to plan, and I suppose then you would recommend that people seek advice from a family solicitor or a friend, or if alternatively find a solicitor on the high street that could help them with that. Would that be correct?
Well, what you need to do is think about going to see somebody who's actually got experience of the area you're interested in. If you're going to someone who's been drafting wills for the last 30 years, they're not necessarily going to know much about e-commerce, but they generally would be able to refer you somewhere. If not, you can actually go to the Law Society, and they're available on the web, and you can actually search for solicitors with a certain specialty. But again, before you start anything, find out how much they're going to charge so you know what your potential costs are going to be from the start.
So how should an entrepreneur plan for handling, for example, product liability insurance?
Well, under UK law and EU law, it's really important that you cover yourself for liability to a consumer. Again, there's a whole raft of legislation, Consumer Credit Act, Trade Descriptions Act, that you as a supplier would be liable for if it becomes faulty. So you need to take out some form of product liability insurance. And where it's a new and sort of unproven product, because it's a new invention, you need to find a broker who will actually go and describe what you want to do to the market and tailor an insurance for you. But it's definitely something you need to plan for.
Product liability insurance will have different implications in different geographical territories?
Yes, in Europe it's pretty standard, but if you're dealing with the US or the Far East, you need to look at how it operates abroad, but your broker should be able to help you with that. Often when you return products to shops, they will say, oh, you have to go back to the manufacturer, but that's often not the case. Your first port of call is the person who sold it to you, then the manufacturer, and then sometimes the supplier, but you are going to be the one who's taking the brunt of it first off, so you need to have that protection.
How should entrepreneurs plan for handling those warranty terms?
Well, you are limited in some ways because under the Sale of Goods Act, you as the supplier are responsible to make sure the product is of merchantable quality, it's fit for the purpose. If you sell a sample, the goods have to conform to that sample. But you might think you're being clever and try and limit it and to actually take out saying, oh, this doesn't apply to me here. But you can't do that. Another act came in several years later saying you can't limit your liability for certain things, including if you cause death or personal injury as a result of your product. So insurance is really the way. You need to be straightforward in relation to your terms of business and make sure you're not trying to avoid any liability which would render it illegal. Anne-Marie,
a question we often get asked is how should entrepreneurs handle confidentiality in the early stages of new product development?
The problem is that when you've come up with a new idea, you're usually really excited about it, so you want to tell everybody, but the first thing you've got to think about is don't tell anybody, because if it is a new and novel invention, as soon as it's in the public domain, i.e. other people know about it, you then can't patent it. So the first thing you need to do is get signed up to a confidentiality agreement. Under the terms of that, it will be that any information you disclose to the recipient is bound to keep it confidential. Similarly, if they impart information to you, you would also have to keep it confidential. So there's a liability as well as a protection for you. It usually lasts for a number of years. 3 to 5 years is pretty standard, so that you've got time to develop your product without somebody else sneaking in and grabbing the potential to make money out of it. So it's really important to make sure you sign a confidentiality. If you're not offered one, ask for one.
What are the obligations of entrepreneurs that may not be obvious to them when they're starting out on a project?
As I said before, planning is essential. Make sure you know where you want to go, and look at how you're going to get there and the stages and the implications for you personally and financially. Really important. Make sure you're realistic about the time frames involved, because if you're rushing into something and going ahead, then sometimes you can bite off more than you can chew. You get to a situation where you're promising things that you can't deliver on. So it's really important to know the limitations of what you're actually able to do at a given time. When you're planning and you're budgeting, make sure you're building in all the fees you need for those experts who are going to give you advice. It's really important. And if you're involved in running the project whilst also being employed elsewhere, make sure you're planning your time effectively. You can burn out, you can not be giving the true amount of time to each part of your life, and keep it realistic. And the obligations side, which is really important, is making sure you don't represent anything that you can't deliver.
What are the other legal problems that entrepreneurs commonly face?
That you might be joining in with people who are giving you backing. If somebody comes along and says to you, we're really interested in backing your product, make sure you're not giving them too much of your interest in your company or in your partnership or whoever else. Know the people you're dealing with. It's really important to research them, and they'll probably want to research you. So don't say things you can't deliver on. Don't pretend to be somebody you're not. Be realistic. And if you do need advice, go and get it.
What advice is really worth paying for in the early stages?
Well, in relation to protecting your own design, going to see a patent attorney is really important. They will look into whether there's a patent already pending in relation to the product you want to go ahead with, and they will advise you on the best terms of protecting it, both in the UK, the EU and the world generally. Go and see an accountant. Whilst you might be able to balance your own checkbook and everything else, it doesn't mean you can actually plan in relation to corporation tax, carrying forward debts, how to deal with bad debts, how to look at your cash flow. So going to see an accountant is really important. Going to see a lawyer to make sure if you need a partnership agreement, if you need a company formed, and to advise you on your liabilities as an individual. Maybe go and see a PR or marketing individual who can tell you where your product would fit into the market and tell you what the competitors are up to. It's really important also to look at the IT. Can you actually develop your product? And a lot of products these days are sold on web-based commerce, so make sure you've got the IT support to let you actually go ahead with your business effectively.